He can't respect you until you become the kind of woman who respects herself with such relentless clarity that your presence alone demands a higher standard from everyone around you. You don't earn that kind of respect by asking for it, begging for it, or trying to convince someone of your worth. You earn it by becoming a woman whose actions, boundaries, and habits speak louder than any emotional plea ever could. This type of woman doesn't live in reaction, she lives in intention. She wakes up knowing that her time, her energy, and her emotional investment are not cheap. They are expensive, refined, and give only to those who have the capacity to handle them. A man cannot respect what you do not protect. And too often, women fall into the trap of believing that if they are understanding enough, flexible enough, forgiving enough, he will eventually value them. But emotional flexibility without standards becomes self-betrayal. And self-betrayal always destroys respect, both his and yours. The turning point happens the moment you decide that you will no longer negotiate the fundamental truths of your life, what you want, what you need, and what you refuse to tolerate. Respect starts internally, long before a man ever shows up. It begins in the discipline to tell yourself the truth, even when your feelings try to distort it. The truth that your value is not dependent on his validation. The truth that attention is not the same as loyalty. The truth that potential is not the same as commitment. The truth that love is not earned by overextending yourself to prove you're worthy of staying. When a woman finally confronts those truths, she undergoes a shift so powerful that the dynamic of every relationship in her life changes. She stops waiting for a man to choose her and starts choosing herself first, not out of ego but out of responsibility. Responsibility for her emotional environment. Responsibility for the relationships she allows to shape her. Responsibility for the standards she teaches others through consistency, not speeches. A man respects a woman who lives by structure, not chaos, because structure reveals strength. It reveals a woman who does not crumble under pressure, who does not abandon her boundary when chemistry gets intense, who does not collapse into neediness the moment she feels fear. This kind of woman is not cold or unfeeling, she is grounded. She knows that stability in herself creates stability in her relationships, and it is exactly that stability that makes a man step up, think deeper, act better, and grow stronger, because he senses he can't approach her with laziness or inconsistency. He respects her because she respects her own time enough to walk away from uncertainty. He respects her because she respects her voice enough to speak truth without apology. He respects her because she respects her heart enough to protect it rather than hand it to someone who hasn't shown the capacity to hold it. And here's the paradox: when you stop chasing his respect, you become the kind of woman he cannot help but respect. When you stop trying to convince him of your worth, you rise into the version of yourself that reminds him he must earn the right to stand beside you. This isn't about being superior, it's about being selective. A woman who is selective becomes a woman who is valued. A woman who is valued becomes a woman who is respected. And a woman who is respected becomes a woman a man will move mountains for, because he knows she does not settle for half-effort, half-truths, or half-hearted love. But understand this: becoming that woman is not an act. It is a daily practice. It requires consistently choosing discipline over impulse, clarity over confusion, boundaries over comfort, and self-respect over temporary emotional gratification. It means you stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. You stop explaining your standards to people who thrive on ignoring them. You stop romanticizing potential and start measuring behavior. You stop giving your heart to inconsistency and start giving your life to purpose. When you live this way, you do not intimidate men. You eliminate the ones who are not ready and attract the ones who are aligned. And the man who is aligned with you will feel it instantly. He will feel the depth of your integrity, the weight of your clarity, and the power of your self-respect. He will know that you are not a woman he can simply charm. You are a woman he must commit to, rise to, and grow with. Respect becomes the natural consequence of who you are, not something you hope he gives you, but something he must give if he wants to stay. Because you've become the type of woman whose presence transforms the room, whose standards shape the relationship, and whose self-mastery commands respect long before you ever ask for it. Respect begins where self-discipline replaces emotional chaos, because no one can value a person who is constantly ruled by impulse, fear, or unstable reactions. When you operate from emotional chaos, you hand over your power without realizing it. You react instead of responding. You cling instead of choosing. You overthink instead of observing. You chase certainty from people who haven't earned the right to guide your emotions. But the moment you introduce self-discipline into your internal world, everything shifts. Self-discipline is not about suppressing feelings. It's about directing them with intention. It's the decision to pause before you speak, to think before you attach, to evaluate before you invest. It's the strength to separate temporary emotions from long-term truth. And when you start living that way, people can feel the difference instantly. Your presence becomes more grounded. Your decisions become more consistent. Your reactions become more measured. Chaos invites disrespect because it signals instability. Discipline commands respect because it signals strength. A person who respects themselves mentally, emotionally, and spiritually sets a tone that cannot be ignored. Respect begins when you respond with clarity instead of emotional noise. It begins when you stop assuming, stop catastrophizing, and stop building stories in your mind that do not align with reality. Emotional chaos makes you act out of fear, jealousy, or insecurity. Self-discipline makes you act out of truth, vision, and self-worth. The disciplined woman doesn't beg for reassurance. She creates certainty through her actions and direction. She doesn't spiral when someone pulls back. She evaluates whether that distance reveals misalignment. She doesn't lose herself in someone else's potential. She measures them by their consistency. This is where respect becomes unavoidable. When you are no longer controlled by your emotional storms but instead guided by your inner structure. Discipline teaches you to walk away when something violates your peace, rather than trying to force it to work. It teaches you to study patterns instead of listening to excuses. It teaches you to allow people to show who they are instead of projecting who you wish they were. Emotional chaos demands attention. Self-discipline demands respect. Because a person who is anchored within themselves cannot be manipulated, distracted, or emotionally shaken by superficial behavior. They navigate with a clear mind, a centered heart, and a stable sense of identity. Discipline teaches you to set boundaries not as a threat, but as a reflection of your standards. It teaches you to detach when necessary, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. When someone senses that your emotional world is not easily penetrated by their inconsistency, they adjust. They either step up or step back, and either outcome serves your growth. The world respects people whose feelings don't override their principles. When you practice self-discipline, you stop giving unearned access to people who drain you, confuse you, or disrespect your values. You become more intentional about who gets your time and who gets your silence. You start choosing peace instead of drama. You start choosing truth instead of fantasy. You start choosing yourself instead of waiting to be chosen. Emotional chaos makes you reactive. Discipline makes you powerful. It allows you to remain calm in situations that once triggered you. It allows you to hold your ground when someone tests your boundaries. It allows you to walk away with dignity instead of clinging with desperation. Respect becomes the natural consequence of a life lived with structure. When you speak, people listen because your words are not impulsive, they are rooted in clarity. When you make decisions, people trust them because your direction is not driven by insecurity, it is driven by purpose. When you choose relationships, people feel honored because they know you do not move lightly. And here is the deeper truth. Respect from others begins with respect for yourself. But respect for yourself begins with the discipline to govern your emotions before they govern you. You cannot control everything that happens, but you can control how you interpret, respond, and internalize it. And that is where your true power lies. Emotional chaos is exhausting, unpredictable, and destructive. Self-discipline is empowering, stabilizing, and transformative. It builds confidence from the inside out. It sharpens your intuition. It strengthens your identity. It makes you someone who cannot be easily swayed, provoked, or diminished. People respect the woman who can stay calm in the storm because she is no longer fighting with the wind. She is anchored in her truth. She knows that her value is not determined by circumstance or validation. She knows that emotional storms pass, but character remains. She knows that real strength is not loud, it is controlled. And when you carry yourself with that level of discipline, the world adjusts to you. People become more careful with their words, more intentional with their actions, more accountable with their behavior. Why? Because they sense they cannot play with your emotions the way they could when chaos controlled you. You have become centered. You have become clear. You have become someone who commands respect not by force, but by who you have disciplined yourself to become. When she becomes a woman of structure, clarity, and self-mastery, she transforms how every man responds to her. Because men instinctively adjust to the energy of a woman who governs herself with discipline and purpose. A woman without structure becomes easy to influence, easy to confuse, easy to take for granted. But a woman with structure becomes impossible to manipulate, impossible to destabilize, and impossible to disrespect. Her structure is her framework, her daily habits, her standards, her boundaries, her sense of direction. It tells the world exactly who she is without her needing to say a word. Clarity strengthens that structure. She knows what she wants, what she will not tolerate, what she stands for, and where she is going. A woman with clarity doesn't fall for potential because she measures people by reality. She doesn't chase mixed signals because she recognizes that confusion is already an answer. She doesn't sit in uncertainty hoping for change because clarity makes her fearless enough to choose herself and walk away. And then comes self-mastery, the most magnetic, transformative force a woman can cultivate. Self-mastery means she is no longer ruled by emotional impulses, by fear, by overthinking, or by the chaos of her past wounds. She responds instead of reacts. She observes instead of assuming. She speaks with intention instead of desperation. A woman who has mastered herself becomes powerful, not because she controls others, but because she controls her inner world. And this combination of structure, clarity, and self-mastery create a presence that shifts the behavior of every man who encounters her. The unprepared man feels intimidated by her, not because she is aggressive, but because she exposes his lack of discipline. The inconsistent man becomes uncomfortable around her, not because she tests him, but because her standards reveal his immaturity. The half-hearted man falls away, not because she pushes him out, but because he cannot survive in the environment her self-mastery creates. The right man, the man with vision, integrity, and emotional responsibility, rises to meet her. He becomes sharper, more intentional, more accountable, because the energy she carries invites him to step into his highest form. A woman like this doesn't demand respect, she inspires it. Her presence alone creates pressure, not the destructive kind, but the kind that makes others want to show up better. Men pay attention to her because she pays attention to herself. She holds herself to standards that naturally filter out anything and anyone who cannot match her level. She doesn't play games, and she doesn't tolerate them. Her clarity kills confusion before it grows. Her structure kills inconsistency before it spreads. Her self-mastery kills insecurity before it sabotages her path. She becomes the type of woman whose boundaries are not walls but gates. Gates she opens with discernment, not desperation. And here's the truth. Men respond differently to a woman who knows how to govern herself because she becomes rare. She becomes the exception, not the rule. She refuses to be dragged into emotional chaos. She refuses to be anyone's backup plan, emotional crutch, or temporary convenience. She carries herself with a quiet confidence, a confidence that says, if you want access to my life, you must come correct. And that tone, that energy, that self-respect reshapes how a man views her. Suddenly, he listens more carefully. He shows up more consistently. He thinks before he speaks. He takes her seriously. He feels that he cannot afford to mishandle her, because losing a woman like that means losing peace, clarity, and alignment. She becomes the type of woman who makes a man evaluate himself, his habits, his intentions, his emotional maturity. And if he is not ready, he will stay away, not because she pushed him, but because her presence demands accountability. A woman of structure, clarity, and self-mastery is not easily swayed by flattery, distracted by attention, or weakened by loneliness. She doesn't need a man to complete her. She invites a man to complement her. She doesn't sacrifice her standards to avoid being alone. She upholds them because they protect her destiny. She doesn't hand over her heart recklessly. She offers it when consistency, character, and commitment prove they deserve it. She becomes a leader in her own life. Not masculine, not hardened, but sovereign. And sovereignty in a woman softens the right man and challenges the wrong one. When she reaches this level, every man responds differently, because she is no longer playing the same game. She rises above chaos, pressure, and insecurity, and she steps into a version of herself that cannot be dimmed. She becomes magnetic, not because of beauty or charm, but because of the discipline behind her identity. She becomes unforgettable because true self-mastery is rare. And when a woman reaches this level, respect is no longer something she demands, it is the only thing she receives. Respect begins where self-discipline replaces emotional chaos, because chaos is the fastest way to lose control of your life, your relationships, and your identity. Emotional chaos makes you unpredictable, reactive, and easy to manipulate. Self-discipline makes you grounded, intentional, and unshakable. The moment you stop letting your emotions dictate your decisions, people instantly shift how they treat you. They stop testing you. They stop assuming you'll tolerate disrespect. They stop thinking you're someone they can push, pull, and confuse at will. Emotional chaos is when you respond from fear, attachment, insecurity, or overthinking instead of reality. It's when you let anxiety build stories that don't exist, when you assume instead of observe, when you react instead of evaluate. But self-discipline is the opposite. is the ability to pause before you act, to think before you attach, to reflect before you speak. It's the internal strength that stops you from chasing clarity from people who only offer confusion. It's the power that stops you from giving endless chances to those who show you the same pattern. It's the wisdom that stops you from emotionally overinvesting in someone who hasn't earned the right to influence your peace. When you replace chaos with discipline, you stop behaving from impulse and start behaving from self-respect. Your boundaries become firm, not flexible based on who you're afraid to lose. Your standards become consistent, not negotiable when emotions get heavy. Your voice becomes steady, not shaky from fear of abandonment. And this shift changes everything, because when a woman becomes emotionally disciplined, she becomes someone who can no longer be controlled by temporary affection, surface-level attention, or inconsistent behavior. She becomes a woman who chooses herself over the chaos of someone else's uncertainty. She no longer needs validation to know her worth. She no longer allows someone's mood to dictate her value. She no longer entertains relationships that drain her, distort her, or destabilize her. Emotional chaos creates drama. Self-discipline creates peace. Emotional chaos drives people away. Self-discipline attracts the right ones. Emotional chaos makes you lose respect for yourself. Self-discipline makes the world respect you. People respect what is anchored, what is consistent, what is intentional. They respect a woman who is not ruled by her insecurities but guided by her standards. They respect the woman who can stay calm when those around her are trying to provoke her. They respect the woman who doesn't explain her boundaries repeatedly because she enforces them silently. They respect the woman who isn't desperate for attention because she is loyal to her own direction. Self-discipline teaches you when to stay, when to leave, when to wait, and when to walk. It protects you from the damage of your temporary emotion. It stops you from apologizing for things that were only reactions to fear. It prevents you from investing in relationships that drain your potential. It saves you from repeating cycles that you were meant to outgrow. And here's the truth. People can feel your discipline long before you say a word. They feel it in how you carry yourself. They feel it in how you respond to conflict. They feel it in how you refuse to be emotionally dragged into situations that once controlled you. They feel it in how you walk away with clarity instead of clinging out of fear. Emotional chaos is a signal that you are scattered. Self-discipline is a signal that you are centered. And a centered woman is powerful because she cannot be shaken by someone else's inconsistency. She cannot be broken by a temporary disappointment. She cannot be confused by mixed signals. She cannot be derailed by emotional pressure. She sees through excuses. She recognizes patterns. She trusts herself over her fears. She makes decisions based on values, not impulses. And it is that version of you the world cannot help but respect, because you're not trying to be understood, you're trying to be aligned. You're not begging for closure, you're creating your own. You're not asking for someone to show up. You're evaluating whether their actions deserve your presence. You're not hoping someone values you. You're valuing yourself so deeply that anyone who wants access must match the standard you've built. This is how respect is born, not from emotion, but from mastery. Not from chaos, but from control. Not from fear, but from strength. Respect begins the moment you decide that your emotional world is no longer up for negotiation. Respect begins the moment you choose discipline over drama. Respect begins the moment you protect your peace like it is your greatest asset. Because it is. And the world cannot help but respond differently to the woman who masters. A woman becomes powerful when her values, boundaries, and direction are non-negotiable, because that is the moment she stops living by the expectation of others and starts living by the truth she holds within herself. When a woman knows what she believes in, what she stands for, and what she refuses to tolerate, she becomes impossible to sway, manipulate, or diminish. Her power doesn't come from being loud or aggressive. It comes from being anchored. Values give her identity, boundaries give her protection, and direction gives her purpose. She no longer bends her standards for temporary companionship or emotional comfort. She no longer lets fear talk her into accepting less than she deserves. She no longer entertains people who drain her, confuse her, or force her to question her own worth. When her values are non-negotiable, she refuses to betray herself just to keep someone else comfortable. She knows that compromising her core only leads to resentment, regret, and repeated heartbreak. She lives with integrity even when it's inconvenient. She chooses alignment over approval. She chooses truth over temporary pleasure. She chooses long-term growth over short-term validation. And because her values are steady, her life becomes steady. And when her boundaries become non-negotiable, she becomes unshakable. Boundaries are not walls, they are standards. They tell others how to treat her, how to speak to her, and how to show up in her life. A woman with firm boundaries doesn't argue with disrespect. She distances herself from it. She doesn't explain her worth. She embodies it. She doesn't chase effort. She recognizes that anyone who wants access to her must show consistency, not excuses. Boundaries protect her time, her energy, her mind, and her heart. They filter out the people who are not ready for a woman of her strength. And that filtering is where her power sharpens. When direction becomes non-negotiable, she becomes unstoppable. A woman with direction knows where she is going, so she cannot be distracted by things that do not contribute to her path. She no longer wastes years on someone who keeps her stuck. She no longer abandons her goals for a relationship that gives her nothing in return. She no longer slows down her journey to accommodate someone who refuses to grow. Her direction becomes her compass. It removes confusion and replaces it with clarity. People around her begin to rise or disappear, and either outcome serves her progress. Because a woman with direction walks differently, thinks differently, and chooses differently. She becomes selective, not desperate. Purposeful, not passive. Focused, not chaotic. When a woman reaches this level, when her values, boundaries, and direction are no longer up for negotiation, she becomes intimidating to the wrong people and magnetic to the right ones. Those who once tried to test her find that she no longer reacts the way she used to. Those who once took her for granted realize she has detached from their inconsistency. Those who once controlled her with mixed signals discover she has become emotionally unreachable to games. Her silence becomes stronger than her arguments. Her presence becomes stronger than her explanations. Her standards become stronger than her emotions. And that's where real power begins, not from controlling others, but from controlling what she allows and what she aligns with. Her confidence becomes rooted in discipline, not attention. Her peace becomes rooted in boundaries, not isolation. Her self-worth becomes rooted in truth, not fear of losing someone. And when she stands in that truth, she becomes someone a man cannot play with, cannot confuse, and cannot replace. She becomes the type of woman a man must step up for, because her standards do not bend for inconsistency. She becomes the kind of woman who makes others question their own behaviors, because her presence reveals who is serious and who is pretending. A non-negotiable woman doesn't lose people. She simply reveals who was never meant to have access to her. And here's the deeper truth. When a woman becomes this version of herself, she doesn't become hard, she becomes whole. She doesn't become cold. She becomes clear. She doesn't become unapproachable. She becomes unreachable to anything beneath her worth. Her power is not in what she demands, it is in what she refuses to settle for. It is in the standards she keeps even when no one is watching. It is in the discipline she shows even when emotions tempt her to break her own rules. It is in the loyalty she gives to herself, not to the potential of someone who hasn't proven they belong in her life. A woman becomes powerful the moment she becomes non-negotiable, because that is the moment she finally realizes that her life, her heart, and her destiny are too valuable to be shaped by anything or anyone who cannot meet her where she stands.